All right, we are live on YouTube.
Fabulous. So do we want to let everybody in the waiting room?
Yes?
Yes, we're like nodding, but yes.
Yeah, maybe just drop your YouTube link in the chat so that yeah, we can tweet it out or something as well. Or Maya can, so I can retweet it.
Rupert, the YouTube link will be, it's being recorded now. I don't know if I can share it now, can I?
I think you can. So we are live. Welcome, everyone. Our talk is going to begin in just a moment. My name is Juliana Medeiros. I'm a scientist here at the Holden Arboretum, and I'm going to be one of your co-hosts tonight, along with Ms. Maya Allen, who you will meet in just a moment. I'd like to give a few technical notes before I introduce my co-host and we hear from tonight's speaker. First, just so that you're aware, we are recording this Zoom meeting, and the meeting will be live streamed to YouTube, where it will be permanently archived for public viewing. The audience microphones will be muted for the entire talk, and we also recommend that audience members turn off their camera during the talk. We do encourage you to ask questions, and for that, we'll be using the chat feature. Ms. Allen will serve as moderator tonight, and she will be monitoring the chat window for your questions. You can submit your questions in chat at any time during the talk, and then at the end of the talk, Ms. Allen will choose questions from the chat window to ask the speaker. So, looks like it's about time, so let's get started. Once again, welcome to Holden Forest and Gardens Scientist Lecture Series. Our mission here at Holden Forest and Gardens is to connect people with the wonder, beauty, and value of trees and plants to inspire action for healthy communities. We are very proud to be partnering today with Black Botanists Week to bring you the 10th installment of this very exciting year-long lecture series entitled Growing Black Roots, the Black Botanical Legacy. This series is covering a broad range of botanical disciplines and delving into the historical legacy of formally trained and self-taught Black botanists. Through this series, we seek to shine a light on the Black roots within botany and to foster a community of Black botanists, to demonstrate diversity within this community and inspire others who may not have considered botany as a career choice. We want to give a great big thank you to the Cleveland Foundation for sponsoring this lecture series. The Cleveland Foundation works to enhance the lives of all residents of Greater Cleveland now and for generations to come by working together with donors to build community endowment, address needs through grant making, and provide leadership on key community issues. You can learn more at clevelandfoundation.org. All right, now for the fun part, I'd like to introduce my co-host, Ms. Maya Allen. Ms. Allen is one of the founding members of Black Botanist Week and also a graduate student at the University of New Mexico. She is studying the ecology and evolutionary biology of the role of phenotypic plasticity in colonization success. Ms. Allen is going to tell you a little bit more about Black Botanist Week and introduce tonight's speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Medeiros, for that introduction. We are very excited about this partnership with Holden Forest and Gardens. So Black Botanist Week was founded just this past summer to promote, encourage, create a safe space for, and find more Black people in BIPOC who love plants. And we're super excited to let you all know here tonight that we are almost to our second annual Black Botanist Week. So you can see our teaser flyer here, and this is going to be July 26th through July 31st. So mark your calendars and be sure to follow us on our Instagram and our Twitter pages for when we release the day-by-day agenda. And without further ado, next slide, please. Our speaker tonight is Mr. Rupert Koopman, and thank you. He is the conservation manager at the Botanical Society of South Africa. a membership-driven conservation NGO, and an ex-chair of the Fynbos Forum Organizing Committee, the conference where he met Dr. Tanisha Williams, our founder. He leads the implementation of the Botanical Society's plant conservation strategy, which includes alignment with state and NGO partners and volunteers for plant conservation work across South Africa. For reference, there are approximately 3,000 threatened species and numerous threatened habitats. Even though he started out as a threatened species brat, he has matured to appreciate the importance of landscape level conservation, how that ties to ecosystem services that support human and planetary well-being, and how to think about the relevance of plant conservation at a societal level. His formative years include 12 years working specifically with threatened species and habitats in the Fynbos, a renowned and beloved biodiversity hotspot of the Cape region. Mr. Koopman's work addresses the complexity of conservation, including both the ecological and the human sides of conservation, fostering an appreciation for threatened and endangered South African plants, while providing important data for conservation managers. So everyone put your hands together and let's give a big welcome.
Thanks, Maya. Let me just pin myself. Yeah, and it's 1 a.m. in the morning in Cape Town, South Africa. So to everyone around who's from this neck of the woods, thanks for joining, and to everyone else all over, thank you for listening as well. Before I start, I just wanted to clear something up. I spoke to Juliana quite a bit in the lead up to this, and she wanted to know whether the picture in the flyer was a traditional headgear. It is not. It is pretty though, and it's from our involvement with this project Turning to Flowers. So go in and Google them. There's a couple of podcasts. They do amazing work around an artistic and aesthetic appreciation of our plants, and it's something that us as scientists can always learn a lot more from. So do check them out. Right. Let's talk about tonight's topic. And I'll be speaking mostly to the pictures, and wanting to draw your attention to, for me, almost where it started. So I'm from Cape Town, South Africa, which is right in the bottom, and I'll show you a map later. And this little piece of Fynbos is a critically endangered patch, less than 9 hectares. So that's about 9 football fields in size. And as you can see, it's surrounded by suburbia. And it's one of the last remaining types of this particular vegetation type, Lawrence Fidelluvium Fynbos. And I think it's for me, it was really good to have my formative years or formative experience in this place, because of the fact that getting to understand that urban remnants are important, and that threatened species are only found in small places is a big conceptual hurdle that I see people do struggle with sometimes, because conservation is normally thought of as expansive, huge nature reserves, parks like Yosemite, or here by us, the Kruger National Park, which is bigger than Israel, and just focusing down to the role that these urban remnants played, both from an ecological and also lifestyle point of view for human health and well-being is something that we really need to be getting our teeth into. Then I work for the Botanical Society. As Maya said, it's a non-profit. We've just turned 108 years old a couple of months ago, and we're based right down here. Just Maya, wave if you can see my cursor going. In Kirstenbosch Botanical Gardens, and we've got branches across the country. And my job is both to work with our branch committees, which are made up of volunteer members, as well as interact with state organizations and conservation peer organizations such as WWF and also municipalities. And again, we've got some more turning into flowers. Here's the chairman of our committee, Bongani Mnisi, at one of our Fynbos Forum conferences. So that's where we operate across the country of South Africa, and you'll be seeing lots of this map going forward through this evening. I want to get my acknowledgements in early. So a couple of the slides and maps were produced by this bunch of colleagues, and we'll start from top left. That's Donovan Kirkwood, curator of Stellenbosch Botanical University. Stellenbosch University Botanical Garden. Bottom left, Clement Cubido from the Agricultural Research Council and also UWC. Bottom center, Kevin McCann from Conservation Outcomes, who also serves on the Botanical Society Council and Conservation Committee. Bottom right, Savanna Parbu Mohan, who heads up the Custodians of Rare and Endangered Wildflowers Citizen Science Program at SANBI, the South African National Biodiversity Institute. Top right, Anisha Diaram from SANBI Vegetation Mapping Unit. And top center, Ishmael Ibrahim, also from CRU down in the Fynbos region. So I always like to start presentations with this old looking map, creating context. And this is for the vegetation scientists in the room. It is a slightly old concept, but it's quite neat to getting our point across about the 6 global floral kingdoms. And the key thing is just to note that South Africa down here at the bottom is the only one where you've got a floral kingdom, which is a geographic and biodiversity unit, which is unique and only found in one country. And then also to look at the global biodiversity hotspots map, which shows similar, where we've got the 3, and there might be a 4th one coming soon, global hotspots in one country, which is also a globally unique thing. So immediately it focuses us to say that South Africa, from a vegetation point of view and biodiversity point of view, has got a lot going on. We're also one of the 17 megadiverse countries. And for those of you that don't know, 10% of the global surface area contains 70% of the Earth's species. And that's just, again, shows how concentrated biodiversity is in various areas, and always drives us towards talking about prioritization. Just for reference, while I was looking at maps, I found that the following one quite interesting to juxtapose at the end of June, the COVID vaccination maps versus the biodiversity maps. And yeah, you can see Africa, for example, has not had sufficient vaccines compared to the rest of the world. So yeah, think of us, but I've also just registered for my round of vaccination, so we're getting there. Right, so our basic biodiversity organizing filter that we use, especially from a vegetation point of view, is the vegetation map of South Africa, Lesotho, and Swaziland. You can see the map on the right, shows there's a lot going on, but I just wanted to quickly show you what the evolution of this map looks like. So South Africa's got quite a proud history and long history of vegetation mapping, starting with the Paul Evans map in 1936, 1953, JPH Acox, mostly on horseback, and looking from an agricultural perspective, did mapping. 1996, a bit more from an ecology perspective, because 2 botanists, Barry Lowe and Tony Rubello, did a kind of biome-based map. And then 2006 was the first publication of the book on the left-hand side. And ever since, we've been refining it and refining it. And the cool thing now is that we're able to have these maps, and they're online and interactive. And what we're doing currently is also that there's a veg map photo project on iNaturalist, where workers like myself can be out in the field, take pictures of habitats, mark it as a particular vegetation type, and then that will be used as a reference for people. So, you know, it's the great thing about online versus a book is that the book is static and there are a couple of pictures in, but online we can have a lot more so that people can have a better idea. Because again, vegetation scientists would know that everyone's opinion is a little bit different when it comes to what makes up a vegetation unit. So it's good to have lots of options to look at. Then from a mapping point of view as well, we want to be seeing, you know, what goes into the mapping. And this is a quick example from the west coast of South Africa, down the Cape where I am, where we've gone out and monitored a beautiful Moraya calcicola from the iris family. It's on a map, and then that information plus connectivity, vegetation, and also representativity gets put into, my ex-colleagues used to speak about smushing it into a conservation planning software, Moxan amongst others. And then we have a prioritization map for how we want to be doing conservation in a particular area. And that's how we guide our activities for protected area expansion or commenting on land use applications or so forth. Then to take a step back from the vegetation map and that intense kind of granular looking is that in South Africa, we have got 9 biomes, and well, 10 if you include the azonal vegetation. And the important thing here is that the biome is a broader organizing block, and we do quite a lot of organizing, not just from a biodiversity point of view, but also from a social view around it. But let me just give you a quick helicopter view of what a couple of these biomes look like on the ground. So this is the succulent karoo, the semi-arid, and I'm just going to show you back on the map where that is. So the succulent karoo is this belt that goes from the border of Namibia and actually extends a bit into Namibia all the way through to the Eastern Cape. I'm going to show you some grassland. So this is the green over here in the summer rainfall area, and also some savanna, which is up on top here, and then end by my favorite, the Fynbos. So it's a succulent karoo. It's arid, but you know, it's one of these global biodiversity hotspots. It's characterized by interesting geology, which is why mining is a threat, because some of that geology is mineral rich. But amazing adaptations by these plants, like this Oophytum, the eggplant almost is what it's called. Oo is egg in Latin. That they basically contract during the dry periods, and then in winter and spring, they come to life like this. Then up north, so that's on the border basically. This is actually just over the border in Namibia. You've got your desert biome. So you can see in the back then, basically the desert is where you've got 50 millimeters or less of annual precipitation. So it's quite a harsh environment. But at that point, we've got the Orange River going through, and all the alluvial areas have been cultivated. you'll remember that big green blob in the map. So that's the grassland. This is an example of misspelled grassland up in close to Pietermaritzburg. And then the kind of classic African that people think of with the big five and so forth habitat is up in the savanna. Oh, sorry. The one thing I wanted to say about the previous two is that Mirspelt as well as savanna are quite dependent on fire and grazing. And then Renosterveld, which is a subset of the Fynbos biome, on fertile soil. So you can see there's a field of canola in the back here, is also dependent on fire. And because of these fertile soils, Renosterveld, the lowland versions are all critically endangered. And then the Fynbos, which is basically similar to chaparral, they're both in the Mediterranean ecosystem or climates. So that's warm, dry, and windy summers and cold, wet winters. So we're in winter at the moment, and it's this mixed shrubland with Proteaceae, dominant Restionaceae, and Ericas or Erica-like shrubs. And the name Fynbos comes from the fact that an adaptation to the Mediterranean climate is that a lot of the shrubs have got either sclerophyllous leaves, which are water adapted, as well as the ericaceous leaves, which are small and reduced also to stop water loss. But why is the Fynbos so interesting? Look, it's got numerous threatened species, very interesting life histories, plants that are found all over the world from a horticultural point of view, come from Fynbos, like freesias and watsonias and other cut flowers, and proteas, obviously, like the one behind me. But I just wanted to show you one little example of why it's so damn interesting. And I'll play the video with no sound and I'll talk over it. So Dizophilfocaria is a dizer which was only collected 5 times, and all pre-1966. And when Callan found it in, I think, 2017 in Hermanus, which is about 60 kilometers east of Cape Town, a bit more, he eventually found only one plant. And I'm going to pause it there. And when he observed this one plant, he saw this beetle, longhorn beetle, having a vigorous interaction with it. Bearing in mind that people had been looking for this dizer for a very long time. And so when he found this one plant and recorded what was going on, and I will drop a link in the chat later to the Scientific American story about it, drawn from his paper. The sexual deception of this plant is so good that this longhorn beetle is basically busy mating with it. And later on, they synthesized the pheromones from it and put it on a matchstick, and the beetles came in and mated with it. And it just shows these really intricate mutualisms that we've got in the Fynbos, that we're still unraveling almost on a yearly basis. We also, with Fieldbook, we're finding undescribed species all the time, and these aren't in under evaluated places. They're places where botanists have been going yearly for a long time. So it just is this cascade of things that we haven't yet found out. So what's useful from an organizing point of view in the conservation space is that we've got a really good history of these various forums which are organized on a biome basis. And we've got the Grassland Society, Thicket Forum, the Arid Zone Ecology Forum, and the Fynbos Forum, And all of these have been going for either more than 40 years and up to about 10, 20 years. But it provides this informal place for people to get together. It's obviously a place for knowledge to be formally shared as well through lectures and workshops. But that teamwork that it starts engendering and the relationships built up really does pay off in the long run. And as Maya said in the intro, Fynbos Forum is where I met Tanisha and basically led to me being involved in Black Botanist Week. So it shows not just the national but international importance of getting together around a central theme in an area, because plants are complex, the habitats are complex, and we only get to grips with it properly by hunkering down and studying these systems for a long time and studying it from various angles. And the more diverse your people looking at it, the more interesting the analyses and then how we were able to understand the system is. So I just wanted to take a little bit of a detour now into what does biodiversity look like? And this is just an example from the grasslands up in Mpumalanga. So these are high altitude grasslands. Just because currently we're in the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration or Ecological Restoration, and there's a lot of push on the carbon capture side. So, we've got billionaires going to trying to go to space instead of investing in conservation. But people think that there are technological fixes, and some of those fixes include planting loads and loads of trees to make up for our impacts. And so in the rear over there is what people see as a productive landscape, because those are trees, they planted in rows, they're going to absorb loads of carbon while growing. Excuse me. From our point of view, the grassland and the wetland in the foreground, that's what we're interested in. It's diverse, it's got a lot of these little species that are seasonal, and also interesting in the grasslands, you've got the phenomenon of underground trees. So it's something which might look quite insignificant above ground, but below ground is massive woody biomass that absorbs as much or more carbon than a tree does. Because, for example, if a fire was to go through that plantation, you'd lose all that carbon up into the atmosphere again. Whereas if the grassland burns on top, only the top bits burn, and you still maintain the underground biomass. So it's an interesting thing we've got to think about, because there's been a lot of these studies pushing for billion tree planting and looking at areas like grassland as empty places where trees need to be put so that we can absorb carbon. And that's something that we're really trying to start pushing back against. In South Africa, if we go back to the biomap, less than 0.6% of our surface area is naturally forest. So it's not something we really want to be doing. And that's why this paper that came out at the beginning of the year from Q, the 10 golden rules for restoring forests, is really good. And I'd suggest anyone who's interested in the restoration field, go and look for this. We're busy writing a local South African version as well, just to start giving guidance to doing restoration in a way which doesn't cause more ecological damage than it should. So back to the kind of threats in the South African landscape. So from our National Biodiversity Assessment, this is a map of habitat loss over time. And basically, for your purposes, the red is where the most habitat loss has happened. And those are our most productive areas, and also where our urban centers are. And that just makes sense. And so what are the major drivers or that make plants threatened and habitat threatened. Construction, so this is a pipeline being constructed right next to a critically endangered patch of land. It's actually Renosterveld as well. And then something a bit more benign looking. So this is rooibos tea cultivation in the Cederberg as well. So the thing with our habitats and the higher levels of endemism and how very patchy it is, which I'll talk to shortly, is that any sort of disturbance at scale has consequences. So yeah, you've got a agricultural piece of land happening, and right outside the fence is this critically endangered Cerurea flava, which is in the Protea family, and it's only found in, it's one of the critical habitat species. It's only found in a very small area. Also, a threat that we also have are invasive species, and especially the woody ones, and especially down in the Cape, where I've done most of my work till now. The ones from other Mediterranean ecosystems like Europe and Australia, where species are fire adapted, they've been a big issue down here. A new threat is the poaching one. So people have been loving South African plants a little bit too much for a long time. So there've always been people coming to South Africa from elsewhere and taking some of these, especially the succulent plants, because they're highly collectible. They survive travel very well because of the adaptations to being dried out because they're in the arid parts. But in the last, I'd say 3 to 5 years, there's been this tremendous escalation in how much plants get taken. And we're now sitting with a situation that out of plants that have been confiscated at law enforcement events, so roadblocks, etc., 45% of them are these little button plants, kind of items. And with the last update of conophytums in the red list, many of them went up into the highest threat categories. And currently we're sitting with a case where at Kirstenbosch, you've got several species which are basically functionally extinct in the wild, and this is where their population is on a desk somewhere. And so what drives it? Instagram basically is one of the big things. So people are really into plants and they love them, which is cool, but then they want to have them, which is not always cool because a lot of these species actually grow pretty well from seed, but collectors are into the gnarled look that you can only get from wild collected plants. And this is a big education thing that we need to be working on. And I understand that in the States and also in Mexico with cacti and Dudleya succulents, there's a similar push towards poaching. So then, just in terms of giving an overview of what the protection status of our ecosystems look like, you'll see forests are actually really well protected. And then the grassland types, the Indian Ocean, and also the Fynbos, there's significant sections which are not well protected. And if you check this map out, it'll show you that where you've got well protected, that's Kruger National Park in the upper northeast. These are the mountains, the Cape Fold Mountains. So it's also like not high conflicts from a development or agricultural point of view. And also up here in the Richtersveld. And so there's significant room for conservation expansion, but also bearing in mind that from an efficiency point of view, as a developing country, we can't just push for everything to be conserved. And also from a conservation point of view, we need to rethink how we do things. So one of our mechanisms for expanding the conservation estate is called biodiversity stewardship. And biodiversity stewardship is interesting. So unlike going out and purchasing land outright, it's a contractual agreement between a landowner and an entity, whether it would be a government or an NGO. And so a lot of our protected area expansion in the last decade especially has been through biodiversity stewardship. As you can see, it's 70 to 400 times cheaper to establish. It's much cheaper to manage. And it's an innovative way going forward. And off this model, there's also NGOs using things like easements, conservation easements, which is something that got imported from the States as a model. And so there are various ways of expanding conservation without just buying land. And yeah, stewardship is something that we definitely support at the Botanical Society. And then also just from a prioritization point of view, it's important, this is studied from WWF a couple of years ago, that we're in a semi-arid country actually, and 8% of South Africa's land mass produces 50% of the water, which means that these water factories up here in the background and also the wetlands, we need to spend a lot more time ensuring that they remain intact, just to make sure that we can make it through. You would possibly have heard of about 4 or 5 years ago, Cape Town was perilously close to what was called day zero, where we would have run out of water from our dams. And there's been drought subsequently in a lot of the other metros around South Africa. So then back to the plants. How many are threatened? Lots of them, as Maya said. So this really starts hitting home in terms of how we need to be thinking about prioritizing, because you can prioritize as much as you want to, but if you still got several thousand species to worry about, prioritization is not enough, and you need to start looking for friends and establishing alliances and making sure that we've got sufficient efficiencies in place. At this point, I also just want to give a shout out to my friends at the Custodians of Rare and Endangered Wildflowers. So this is a program that I've been involved in since I was a student, essentially. So that was a long time ago, where it is a SANBI, South African National Biodiversity Institute program, which involves staff, a small team working in nodes across the country with volunteers in areas of special plant richness. So you can see this map on the right-hand side here, shows where the highest concentrations of threatened species are, and the dots, which are quite small here, are where the various nodes are volunteers that then get trained and given information to be able to go out and do the monitoring and of species, and then that data gets put back into our conservation planning and red listing. And we've very much, especially in the last year, so pivoted to using iNaturalist as a data repository for threatened species monitoring. And then we spoke about South Africa's strategy for plant conservation right at the beginning. So that's a national strategy, which was for a 5-year period. So this was the end of the 5 years. So we're busy with putting together version 2 of the strategy to help knit together our activities as a country. And the strategies was built or broken up into different categories. And I'm just going to show you one of them just so you can understand how we think about things. So target 5 is about important plant areas or identified and incorporated in conservation processes. And this is something we did about 3 years ago, which is the mapping and managing of critical habitats for highly range restricted species. So the mapping exercise was really interesting, using a lot of data and also expert mapping. And then this is my nature reserve from right in the beginning, Harmony Flats, which is the only place in the world where you can find this ixia. There's one other place where that's the only place where it's in habitat. And it just the criteria for a highly range restricted species or critical habitat species is that it's got a home range of 10 square kilometers or less, and it's only found in one place. The thing is, we've got 600 of those in the country. So it's quite a lot of work to be done before all the other work that needs to be done too. This is just an extreme example of a critical habitat species. So this road cutting over here is the only place on the planet where you can find this Agathosma ubicularis, which is in the citrus family, Rutaceae. Yeah, you know, that's one errant mower away from extinction. It's quite difficult to grow. So we've got a lot of these plants which are really teetering on the edge of extinction. This is another example, and I see Eve Emschwil has just joined us. So this is an oxalis, and this particular one, Oxalis fragilis, is something that when there was a dam application for the site on the right, there was a really good botanist who went out, and but he went out in the non-flowering season for this vegetation type. And when we went out again in once there'd been some rain, there was this plant which hadn't been seen since 1936. Luckily, Stellenbosch University have now gone and collected more material, and there's they've actually got second generation out from hand pollinated plants in their collection. But it just shows the precarity of these species and also how much needs to go right in order to be there. So you needed someone who was at the right time of the year, that it had rain, that there was sufficient moisture for the plants to flower. Luckily, there is a group at Stellenbosch University of specialists working on it. So I was able to just send a picture via WhatsApp and get an almost instant opportunity or identification. But it just shows it's a lot of things that need to go right to make sure that something like this would not be missed and just lost to infrastructure development. Juliana in the notes referred to fortress conservation. I think it's a concept that we need to unpack a little bit, because most people do think that this is the way of doing things. So you have your protected area, you put the fence up, and then that's fine. But as we've shown from some of the maps, a lot of our protected areas do not capture all the threatened habitat out there. And then there's also the human factor. In South Africa, between 70 and 80% of South Africans still use indigenous plants for medicinal, spiritual, or cultural purposes. And these areas before the fence went up were not human-free zones. There were indigenous people using these landscapes. And this is some of Clement Kibido and Irshan Samuels' work, talking about herders in Namaqualand, and how which is one of the arid areas, and how actually sophisticated the land use is. So this is the communal area, and some of the infrastructure there, and they've been tracking how the herds use the landscape. And then this is really cool, is that during the day, they look at how the herders manage how the herds move across the landscape. So they'll go from the resting place, and they'll first go to an area where there's a plant community which is dominated by appetite stimulants. And then they'll move them throughout the day to various areas so that the animals get the feed that they need, depending on the time of year and their condition, to moderate their behavior and so forth. So it's an incredibly sophisticated system. And we're only starting to figure out really how these work. So, you know, it again goes to how much we need to learn in order to be managing these places properly. And it's just the consultative processes that they were going through with the herders. Then, I mean, we can't do any of these talks without COVID. Is that in South Africa, our model has definitely been from a conservation funding point of view. Excuse me. To heavily depend on tourism as a money maker, because of the fact that, you know, we're a country, we've got a lot of need, and the fiscus is only this big. And this article from Adam Welch just looked at our biggest, or one of the big conservation agencies, the South African National Parks, and showing what the impact of tourism slowing down has been. So in the annual report, 72% of their income came from tourism, and that's really like dipped in the last period. So we're at a bit of a crisis point in conservation in South Africa, because the various provincial conservation agencies are also in a similar boat as far as funding is concerned, and there's no sign of quick relief coming. Then just to pivot a little bit, is that in my travels anyway, I've seen South African plants prominent as landscape subjects everywhere. So these Strelitzias, the crane flowers on the left, that's just in my garden. The ubiquitous agapanthus, which is a street plant dominating most public areas across the planet. And just the interesting thing from our point of view is that there's very little thinking of where these plants are from, and thinking about how we as a global community can fund these hotspots. So there's a great horticultural trade that happens, and money gets made, but very little flows back. And there are now, you know, through Nagoya Protocol and biodiversity access and benefit sharing legislation, that does make provision for that sort of thing. But you know, being punitive isn't going to help. It almost takes voluntary and maybe public pressure to ask these questions and of industry, and saying, how are we taking care of where the source areas of these much loved plants? And then there's always the flip side. I was talking about invasives earlier, but we've also exported our fair share. And this is the western end of continental Europe, Capo de Roca in Portugal. And all of that is this ice plant, Carpoprotus edulis, which is taken over. And just for reference, because I know that the ice plant is a problem in California and other places in the States, once this flower is done and it makes quite a dried out brown fruit, it's edible. So eat back. you can do it. And also just the leaves are good as if you squeeze the juice out for insect bites, and also as an astringent for sore throats. And then also on the resource conversation, it's been very interesting for me to watch the houseplant grades that's been going on, you know. So we've got these variegated monsteras going for between $700 and $5,000, and Estrelitzia, which is the South African plant, variegated one going for £400. And just to think what we could do with that sort of thing. So the Botanical Society, when we're working with our branches, we've got small conservation projects. And for example, the branch in Gqeberha is the Algoa branch, and they've got a project called Adopt a Plot, where they do management assistance for municipal, urban, critically endangered ecosystems. And for basically, what is it, about 3 monsteras, annually they will look after 3 to 4 of these open areas, which is threatened species monitoring, alien plant removing, using it as education for local communities. So it really puts it in perspective. And one of the projects that Crew's been working on, so this is Ishmael Ibrahim's work, is the Marismodus undulata project. So this is one of those critical habitat species, which is only found in one urban fragment of Renosterveld. There's 22 threatened species there. It's critically endangered vegetation as well. This gives you an aerial of it. So the whole area is a municipal campsite, and these are the natural areas that are left. And essentially 9,500 or 10 monsteras gives you a species survival plan for this. And bearing in mind that we've got 600 of these species, so what's 600 times 10? 6,000 monsteras goes a long way in terms of being able to assist threatened plant conservation in South Africa. So with that, I'd like to finish off. Please check out our website. We've got a range of webinars on a lot of these topics already. If you want to learn more about what we're doing in South Africa from a conservation point of view, we do blogs and so forth as well. So check us out on the socials. And thank you for listening.
Thank you, Rupert. That was a very exciting talk. I want everybody to just give a great round of applause to Rupert, a virtual round of applause. And I think we have some questions in the chat. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Maya Allen to get some questions.
Yes, thank you so much. And we also put a link in the chat to those webinars. So for our audience, go ahead and check that out, whether you're on YouTube or here in the Zoom. If you have questions, go ahead and put those in the chat. So your first question is, wonderful talk and beautiful maps. Are some of these biomes more susceptible to anthropogenic climate change and potential encroachment into other biomes or habitat types?
Yeah, so in each way, the biomes are differently susceptible. So if we move from, maybe I should just open the map again. It's going to make it easier. Give me a second. Right. So how many questions are there? So I know that I can't go into too much detail with all of them. But if we look at, oh, why is that not showing? What are you seeing? Do you see the biomap, or are you seeing this, Natasha?
I'm seeing her slide, but I did see the biomap, but then it went away.
Okay, let me just try that again. Sorry. Let's see. Okay, good. Right. So the succulent karoo one, which is the arid one, what you need to realize is where you see the purple over here, the Fynbos has been retreating over time anyway. So remember, several 100,000 years ago, it was much cooler climate. And then we had the Fynbos going all the way up to the border with Namibia. And as it's heated up, it's retreated to the south. But definitely those succulent plants that I was showing you in the succulent Karoo, there has been aseasonal drying, irregular rains, and I can show you. There was actually a great article in our magazine Felt and Flora a couple of issues ago, which spoke about what would happen, or what's been happening with long-term monitoring, and with the fact that because climate change, as we know, isn't like that kind of day after tomorrow where you have the ice sheets happening overnight and so forth. It's just a disruption of the normal patterns. And so if the rain starts coming a little bit too late, or not as frequently, I mean, what we're seeing in Cape Town, for example, is that we've got the same amount of rain, but the events are much more intense. So when I was a kid, we used to have like days on end of soft rain. And right now we're having these kind of deluges, which is like more erosion and less chance to soak into the ground and so forth. So that's what's happening in my neck of the woods from a climate change weather perspective. And we're still busy because vegetation doesn't change on like a 5-year basis, busy figuring out what those impacts would be. The interesting thing in the grasslands and the savanna is with increasing atmospheric carbon dioxide, is that you've got bush encroachment. So there's a lot more of the woody trees coming in and dominating landscapes that, if you look at historical photographs of 50 years ago, were grass dominated landscapes. And now you've got these trees that have come in. So there's all these different variables across, and because I'm a Fynbos specialist by trade, and only now getting into the rest of the country, I'm sure there's more that I'm missing out on. But there is anthropogenic climate change effect happening.
Kind of on that same note, as we're having an increased rate of climate change in sea levels, what is known about how sea level rise might impact coastal South African biodiversity?
Yeah, so in the Cape again, we've got Fynbos, which is slightly inland, and then a subset in the Fynbos biome is a vegetation called strandveld. So strand is Afrikaans for beach, so it's beach adjacent vegetation. And it's very interesting how we used to think that it wasn't interesting vegetation because it didn't have as many threatened species. And since we've been working with more kind of archaeological people and looking kind of into deep time, is that they're the remnants of a vegetation which, when the sea levels were lower, when it was colder, they extended out onto the continental shelf. So and in fact, these were like super rich environments, and it's probably where modern humans evolved on that edge, on a diet of Fynbos plants, and also access to shellfish, which is where your omega-3s and 6s for brain building comes in. And it was rich from a large animal point of view as well. So some of the researchers say off the south coast of South Africa, which is now underwater, that is basically the Serengeti of South Africa. So the coastal areas are quite vulnerable, and obviously some from a substrate point of view are more vulnerable than others. And yeah, we're tracking that. In Cape Town, for example, there's sandy aquifers close to the coast that historically would have been able to be used for drinking water that we can't use anymore because of sea water intrusion. But that's really low-lying areas, so it's not higher than 50 meters above sea level. But so that tension is happening.
Wow, that's fascinating. Your next question is, do you have a lot of government support for your conservation efforts?
Look, I worked in provincial government, which is state government, for most of my career. I've only recently gone to work in an NGO. So a lot of the work is done by government. And also government departments have got the mandate from a legislation point of view to do things like law enforcement, declare protected areas and so forth that NGOs don't, you know. So we can't do our work without government. Yeah, like I've been in meetings last week with government officials around farm level mapping plans and ways of working with agriculture and so forth. So yeah, we do get support from government, and it's also just about, you know, maintaining relationships and building better ones, you know. And that's where those meetings I was talking about, the Fynbos forums and grasslands and so forth, are important, because you have government officials coming there, and then it's an interface for them to get to know people working in the plant space. And they're also plant scientists, like I used to be one in government. So, you know, it's a peer space. So that's where the action happens. Yeah.
Awesome. So we want to be very cognizant of your time. We really appreciate you joining us at 1 a.m. So your last question is, besides water quality and symbiosis with insects, are there other functions of unique biodiversity of South Africa that you can speak to?
Yeah, so I think just the most obvious one is what I was talking about in terms of the medicinal plants, where people are still living on the land and having that access, but also grazing is super important. So if you looked at that picture, the grasslands are actually pretty productive from a grazing point of view, and they are adapted over time to be grazed by large mammals, versus a plant plantation doesn't really have a lot of food in it. And that's an interesting thing in South Africa with our rangelands, is that a lot of it's too dry for conventional kind of monoculture agriculture. So you couldn't be putting in crops all over the place, but you can make a living from running herds of animals if you do it in a sensitive way, like those herders we were talking about. So in fact, in certain ways, being a meat eater in South Africa, if you know what your source is probably a lower environmental footprint than other options. But obviously, yeah, there'll be differences of opinion. So those are two big things that we should be thinking about.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And the chat, you have many thank yous in the chat, and people really have appreciated your talk on YouTube and here in the Zoom.
Thank you.
Thank you very much from Holden. Also, we appreciate you so much getting up in the middle of the night to enlighten us about all of these wonderful aspects of conservation. I just want everybody to give another round of appreciation. I want to tell everybody this talk's going to be archived on the Holden Forest and Gardens YouTube channel, so you can watch it over and over again. And we have developed some educational materials to go along with this lecture, which you can find on the Holden Forest and Gardens webpage. And last but not least, and we'll put the link in the chat for you right now. Last but not least, we want to remind you to sign up for the next and last talk. I cannot believe I'm saying this, in the Black Botanist Week series. Ms. Natasha Fontaine, a graduate student at Florida State University and curator of the R.K. Godfrey Herbarium, will be joining us for a talk entitled Common But Not Ordinary, Avian Diversity in Florida's Music Flatwoods. So don't miss it. Don't forget to register, and we'll see you all back again next time. Bye.